Toy Story to you. Toy Story to me. I mean, that bit of high quality comedy doesn't bode well for the podcast, does it? No. Leave this in. Leave this in. It's 6:30 in the morning. Roll the titles.
Hello and welcome back to Rewind Reviews, that podcast where we take a look at movies from our childhood, not always, but movies from our past that we're feeling a little nostalgic for and we want to find out, is that still good? It's been a long time coming this. We've done, we're on 90-odd episodes now, I think, or about to hit 90-odd episodes, and we're at that stage, Chris, where we've built up a lot of sequels we need to get to. We've reviewed the first film of many franchises, but we haven't gotten to all of their sequels yet. So, it's sequel season, baby.
Sequel season.
Sequel season time. So, we're starting with Toy Story 2, which I chose at the end of the last series. But very quickly, before we get into Toy Story 2, I've got two very small bits of bookkeeping to do, because I'm going to get 1,000 comments and I want to cover it very quickly. Yes, I have seen the first two episodes of RoboDoc. Robo wants an Oreo will forever live in my mind. It's as mad as our trivia section when we covered that film indicated. And if you're not sure what I'm referring to, there is a documentary called RoboDoc that's come out. It's a 4-part documentary. It's like an hour long each part. It's like a TV series, essentially. It's 4 episodes, and it is absolutely insane. As insane as the story of that movie sounded when we did it. And it's really well put together. They've used like animation and drawings to sort of bring these moments that are being described to life. It's wonderful. So before we get a lot of comments, have you seen it? It's covering some of the stuff you talked about, because I've already had some of those. Yes. We have. I have, and I will finish it. It's really good. So, thumbs up. We like it. And then the other one, Chris, the other little thing I wanted to cover before we get started on Toy Story 2, very quickly, in relation to our Pirates discussion, I would like to issue a somewhat, sort of like a middling, not a middling, like an apology for half of something I said, if that makes sense. Because I very confidently, when you said the physics of the boat with the air underneath the water thing didn't work, I very confidently was like, well, no, that absolutely works. It does, but there is another issue with it. There's another issue with it that occurred to me after the fact, and I've already started to get comments about it, but I knew it was coming because I also realised it. Within a day of recording that episode, I realised where I'd gone wrong. So very quickly, for those who don't remember, it's the moment they go under the water with the boat over their head, and there's like an air pocket, and they stick their heads in it, and that's how they can breathe as they walk under the ocean floor. And Chris said that didn't work at all, and I said, well, a bubble of air will stay, and you can, if you balance it well enough, bring it down. You can do it within your own sink with a cup, turn it upside down and push it down, and you'll see the air stays in the cup. What I did forget was the sheer volume of air they had is a lot more than you get in a cup, and the weight needed to hold that down that deep under the ocean, probably not the amount of weight those two men have, or strength in their arms. So, yes, you can trap water that way, but no, not in those exact circumstances, because that was way too much air for two men to hold down. There would have been too much resistance, it would have pulled them to the surface.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's what I meant,
You were going to say that? It's so funny. It's legitimately, though, I felt bad because I realised it myself within a day, like sort of, maybe I can't remember immediately what the time frame exactly was, but was shortly after, and I thought I'm going to get comments about this, and I did. I've already had those comments. So yeah, anyway, that's admin out of the way. We just watched Toy Story 2. How you feeling, Chris? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's I feel good. It's obviously it's a great movie. Like, I don't think we need to bury the lead on that one. I
No.
think it's leaner than I remember. I'm like at one point, like I look at the thing and there's 26 minutes left, and I'm like, oh, that airport, like you know, I thought the airport sequence was like potentially even longer than that.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it gets through it really quickly. It's very funny. It's ingenious sequel. Do you know what I mean? Like, we explore who Buzz is in 1, we explore who Woody is in 2. We start the themes of what happens when your you know, your child gets older. You know, we explore that beautifully through Jesse and sort of Woody's crisis, which obviously then, you know, is a theme that continues throughout the trilogy.
Well,
A
a theme that
great.
continues throughout the quadrilogy, actually, really.
Yeah, sorry, quadrilogy. I think I meant like trilogy of films from this point. But yeah, no, quadrilogy. Because it's, you know, oh god, Toy Story 4, what a masterpiece. And I know Toy Story 3 is like the film, but we discussed it on MBS and discuss it all the time when we discuss sequels that shouldn't work. But I was not excited for Toy Story 4. I was like, fucking, I'm just not sure they can pull this off, and fucking hell, they pulled it off.
Toy Story 4 is great.
But
I'll fight anyone who says otherwise. Come on, give me a date, give me a time. Let's have a fight. I'm ready.
But right now we're talking Toy Story 2, and yeah, I remember hype for this film. I remember seeing it in the cinema. I remember being excited and enjoying it. That's sort of my only real. And I remember watching it at home as well and enjoying it. And I think my dad hadn't seen it, and we made him watch it. He enjoyed it. Like, yeah, I think from. You know, we talked obviously about nostalgia for Toy Story 1 and our memories of it. I think from this point on, every Toy Story movie is just, I'm excited for that Toy Story movie. I'm going to make an effort to see it in the cinema.
Yeah, and,
it's probably one of the few series, actually, where I literally have seen, I believe, I've literally seen every movie in the cinema.
Well, now, interesting thing, I didn't see this one in the cinema. So I saw the first one in the cinema and absolutely loved it, was obsessed with it. I had like all my school like pencil cases and notebooks were all Toy Story themed. I absolutely loved the first movie, adored it, blah blah blah. Same as a lot of people my age at the time, you know, because I was born in '87, so I was like, when the first one came out in '95, I was like prime age for that movie. And what happened was I moved from England to Ireland, 1999. No, from Ireland back to England, sorry, in 1999, around the release of this movie. And at the time, I was very frustrated at my parents' lack of concern over catching Toy Story 2 in the cinemas. But having just moved countries, I can assure you, they had bigger things to worry about. And I now very much understand why making sure I caught Toy Story 2 in the cinema was not a priority. So I very, very sadly missed Toy Story 2 in cinemas and had an excruciating wait while everyone I knew saw it. All the kids at my new school had seen it. And I just had to wait around until a VHS copy. Which admittedly, I got before official release because, I know we told this story a few times, but just for context for anyone who's jumped in here, my nan worked at a video store and they would send a copy with a watermark on it out to the video store, sometimes like a couple of months before release, to see if the people at the video store would watch it and decide if they liked it enough to buy more copies. Oh, it's a really good film, we'll need to buy lots of copies. Sometimes they just sent out one as like a courtesy. You know, a movie like Toy Story, they were going to order a ton of copies of anyway. But they sent out a copy. I don't know how early, and it varied how early the copies came. But they sent one out, and I got to see it before it was out on VHS, but well after its theatrical run.
I was going to say, you know what's better than seeing it early on VHS, Dan?
Yeah.
Seeing it in the cinema.
Yeah, I would have really enjoyed seeing it in the cinema. But, you know, I still, like...
I saw it earlier than the VHS release, mate.
You did. You definitely did. But I remember the frustration of that.
I'm willing to bet a bigger screen.
But I remember how frustrating that was for me because I loved the first one and all I kept seeing was all the trailers for this one. and the trailers made this movie look so good. And it was on everything. It was like Happy Meals. Every advert on television covered it. Trailers before anything. Like, it was just everywhere. Like billboards, buses, you name it. Toy Story was everywhere. And yeah, it was that was an excruciating wait. That was a tough one, but it was worth it. I remember when I finally saw it, really, really enjoying it and having a really good time with it. I didn't like it as much as the first one at the time, and I still stand by that. I don't think it's as good as the first one. But I will say, what's remarkable about Toy Story 2, if we're doing overall thoughts, if we don't have anything else to stay on, like our history with the film, what I think is always surprising about Toy Story 2 is how vastly entertaining it is. It's probably, if we're ranking them just by entertainment value, Toy Story 2 might be the best one of this franchise. Just sheer stick it on and have a good time. It is laugh a minute, tight as it could possibly be. The action comes and goes in a really fun, bouncy way. The character stuff is all present, but it's not so bogged down in that. All the others, I think, or most of the others, are better films. Being honest with you, this is one of the worst of four amazing film franchise. So I don't want that to come across as a dig at Toy Story 2. I think overall, it's not one of my absolute favorites of this franchise at all. I think the first one's better. I think probably third one's definitely better. Fourth one probably too. Fourth one's closer, but like it's these are all masterpieces to some degree, so it's hard to judge. This one is the most just like fun to watch, though. Like, if you just told me I had an hour and a half and I was going to put a Toy Story film on, it's either this or the first one for entertainment value. Because the other two are so heavy and so involved. I really like this movie for its simplicity and the jokes, which just land consistently, like every few minutes, like every few seconds in this movie. It's remarkable how tight this script is. So yeah, I love this movie. I think it's fantastic. But it's funny that it is very unfortunately sat amongst a series of 4 films where the other 3 are just basically masterpieces, which means it pales in some comparisons. And I will get into the details of in what ways I think it doesn't live up to those others, because there are specifics. But I do still think it's an amazing movie. Yeah. Have you got any overall thoughts? Where does it stand for you in the grand scheme of a Toy Story movie?
It's interesting because I mean, for me, I would, before rewatching, I do think the first one is better. Before rewatching, I'd have said this one's probably last, but still amazing. Do you know what I mean? Just because I think 3 is a beautiful movie, and I had such a good time watching 3 and 4 at the cinema, and 4 I found hilarious and just a real like marvel of like, how the fuck do you pull that off? Like that's insane. But it's funny because as you were talking, I was like, well, I think maybe it's one of those things where actually it can be different, and I was like, I wonder if I just open up a few Toy Story ranked lists, how different they're going to be, and they are fairly different. But I have to say, Toy Story 2 is consistently put quite high on that list, which I think is impressive.
People really love this movie. I don't agree with that, but it doesn't surprise me. People's reverence for this movie is high. Really high, and I do think some of that is the Jessie stuff.
And the thing is, I would go. It's one of those things where I'd go, and because, like you said, we're still talking about amazing movies, and what's funny is I'd have said instinctively, it was towards the bottom for me, and that may still hold true. But that's out of, we're talking about the choice between 4 pizzas. We haven't got a plate of gone off veg among us. Not that I dislike veg, but gone off veg. And I think there's the thing I will say is though, after rewatching it, I'm like, despite where I personally rank it in terms of my favourites, I'd say this is probably a perfect sequel. And actually, there's not much to stop it being a perfect film either. I can't really point many flaws at this. And as a sequel, fucking hell, it extends the world. It continues the thematic explorations of the first one.
Yeah.
It doesn't repeat the first one particularly. I think, if anything, actually, watching it, you can make an argument that Toy Story 3 repeats this quite a bit, and it'll be interesting when we're not going to get to it we're unlikely to get to it this series, I assume, but
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how we feel about Toy Story 3 when we get there, because I think that actually, plot-wise, repeats this more than any other Toy Story plot repeats another plot.
That's an interesting thought, because right now in my head, just off the top of my head, I think my top 2 are locked in as 1, then 3, and then 2 and 4. I think 2, then 4 right now, with 4 being at the bottom.
Yeah, but we're not. I'm not talking about that necessarily being a bad thing or reflecting badly on it, and I'd need to rewatch it to check I'm right. But the villain being a toy who's quite bitter, like, hey, do you know what I mean? There's just
well,
a few
that's also true. That's also
similar.
true of 4, isn't it? With Gabby Gabby.
Yes, yeah, no, it is true of 4, and maybe they, maybe they repeat the beats throughout, but I think. Yeah, it really is like a perfect sequel, as arguably the others are as well, that really is astonishing. Like I say, just on its own merits as a film, I don't think there's much you can poke holes in at. But on its merits as a sequel, it's up there with The Empire Strikes Back in terms of taking what was done in the first, evolving it, making sure it still feels the same. I think what's one tool in their arsenal there is the fact that you've got 2 leads, and you can go, okay, well, where does Woody come from? What's Woody's backstory? Here's a question for you. Here's a nitpick or a question for you. Let's dive in, because it's the only element that I was like, huh. Woody's imagining Andy in that black and white film, yeah?
There's a kid in that black and white film, but it's not Andy.
Right, okay. He's just like seeing Andy. Right, okay.
Like he's imagining it's Andy, but we're not. But it's not physically Andy. I mean, it's a different model. It looks very similar to Andy, but it's not. It's not Andy.
Yeah, and there's a line where Andy's mum says it's a family toy, so maybe it's like that's like Andy's granddad or something.
Well, do you want to get into that now? We could cut something from the Triv by covering it now. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh yeah, mate. The mission of this podcast is to accidentally stumble onto Triv, because I know from what you said there's a hefty Triv. So
yeah. So the movie doesn't explicitly state what year this takes place, but you can sort of put it together basically. The first movie took place in 1995. The first movie is 1995, and in this is a year later. This is 1996. Andy was born in 89. And Woody, from Woody's Roundup, would have been produced in the late 50s. The Life magazine with Woody on the front is from 1957. It's dated as 1957. So theoretically, Andy's dad or mum could have had Woody. And her choice of that phrase, it's a family toy, implies Andy did inherit it from one of his parents. The popular fan theory is that it's from his dad, and that's why he's so attached to it, because obviously his dad is no longer around, you presume, passed away, but we obviously don't know. And that's part of his attachment to Woody. What's interesting is the timeline of that works out pretty perfectly, I think. If the Woody toys were being produced late 50s through the 60s, Andy's dad absolutely could have purchased that toy sort of, early 60s. So he might have still gotten produced, through into the 60s. That would have just about lines up. Woody also does say in this movie a record player. I haven't seen one of those in ages. Because obviously you're not likely to get record players in the 90s. That definitely indicates Woody had life before Andy. And it's interesting that, because you'd think that would play into the plot of the movie, because the plot of the movie is about their kids growing up. If Woody was produced in the 50s, has he not experienced this before? To some degree. It'd be interesting to explore that.
But he can't. He can't remember if the doll in the TV show is literally him.
Oh no, it's not literally him.
Then
I'm not suggesting it's literally him. I'm saying he's a toy produced based on that show, the same way Buzz is produced based on a science fiction movie that came out around that same time.
I don't know, man. If there's no Stinky Pete out of the box in that film, like I think you could make a read that it's literally him.
No, they're puppets
the movie,
in the movie. They're puppets. They've got like you can see these like separations in their jaws, so their mouths can move, and they are very different.
Strap a string on a toy, you got a puppet.
Disagree strongly because they have been very deliberate.
I
know. But yeah, a lot of people think that that's the thing. There's also a working theory, and I don't like this one or agree with this one, but there's a big theory as well that Andy's mum was Jesse's original owner. Because, so very quickly, he calls her Bazooka Jane in this, Andy. That's what he calls Jessie. In Toy Story 3, he does call her Jessie. And the question becomes, how did he find out that doll's real name?
That's tenuous, isn't it?
A lot of people, well, I mean, did he Google it? I guess, maybe. I don't know. But, like, it is interesting that Toy Story 3 Andy knows she's called Jessie. Where would he? It is interesting to think, where would he get that information? So a lot of people have gone and posited the theory that Andy's mother might have been Emily. And she told him the name of the doll when she first saw it.
That's a fucking depressing scene. Like a mum
do you want to talk about that scene now? Are we there? Like, I don't know. It's a tough one.
No, I mean that would be like that missing scene to make that theory work is fucking depressing.
Oh right, yeah, I would agree.
Emily sees. Andy's mum sees Jessie and she's like, "This is the toy I had." Andy's like, "I thought you bought this for me." She's like, "Nope." And they're like, "That's a bit weird. How did that happen?"
Yeah, yeah. Andy's mum starts being a bit more suspicious of the toys after that.
Yeah.
I have a question for you though, because
could I just because we haven't really It's really difficult because I like the notion of Woody being a family toy. I see why they didn't go down the route of exploring that because I think it makes Andy and Woody muddy because the whole series is about Woody letting go of Andy letting go of Woody, and I think the notion of Woody being like, I have been there before would be difficult. So it is weird that, like, how can it be both things? But I like it being both things. And, you know, in a world where toys are going across the road and nobody seems to really notice, I'm fine with them just going, you know what, we don't need to work out the exact logistics of that. Like, that's okay for this movie.
It does muddle things, but I will say I think it's tricky when you're establishing Woody as a collector's item from at least 20, 30 years ago, even if he was produced late, even if this set of Woody, Jessie, and the Prospector were made as legacy toys for a thing that had happened long ago, right? So, you know, it's like if they make Star Wars toys,
which doesn't work with the theory. Doesn't work with the theory that they are the things that are used in the show. But yeah, carry on.
So, I mean, that is just I know exactly what you're doing at this point, but it's still irritating me, and I really need to stop letting it irritate me. They're categorically not the things in the show. But if they're legacy,
we don't know that for sure.
We do know that for sure. But even if we work under the assumption they're legacy toys, you know, that were made more recently, and Andy really was Woody's first, you know, so it was a toy made of an old thing. You know, but they're still collectible because they were only a short run or whatever. Or it was a toy produced at the time, but it stayed in its box, and Andy acquired it in the 80s. You know, it was given to him at birth, basically, you know, in 89. Even if we're working under that assumption, then you've got this weird thing of like, well, what happened in the meantime? Was he just Does Woody not want to talk? Like, either Woody doesn't want to talk about an owner prior to Andy, or when they're talking about being in storage for a long time and not played with for a long time, that's also true. Like, it's one or the other. Do you know, he's either a family toy or he has a lot to relate to Jesse with. I don't see a way around it. So it's one of those things where the film kind of has to ignore this thing, but it's funny because there's really no way to, like, these plots are dealing with these exact ideas, so it's extra strange it doesn't come up. It's not like an arbitrary part of Woody's history. If he's been through a child growing up before, that would come up because that's the plot of the movie. Or if he went in storage for a long time because he was like he was a legacy thing that only came to Andy's possession, then he was in storage for a long time. The only other explanation is that he was a brand new toy produced in the 90s for a TV show that was cancelled in the 50s, which doesn't seem likely.
Or you go, there's a kind of thing. And you could probably pull on Toy Story 4 for this if you wanted to, but I think that you can fansplain it and go, if a toy comes to life when it's played with, or has friends, or has something to keep it going. If a toy is literally not like Stinky Pete, where put in kind of kept with the others around him, and there's a goal. If a toy is literally laid to the side, the toy can sort of reset itself and then come back to life when someone starts playing with it. I mean, it's fucking dark. Would
that not have happened with Jesse?
Well, that's what I mean. It's a stretch. I'm fansplaining here to try and make it make sense.
I think,
but Jesse has friends. Like, regardless of the fact that they're being kept there, Jesse could have easily gone straight from Emily. You know, it could be Al that picks her up from the side of the road. Whatever. Do you know what I mean? So Jesse.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know what I mean, though. I'm just I'm stretching here, but I think like trying to make it work.
I think with a lot of Pixar movies, it's best not to question it. I mean, God, if we ever cover the Cars,
exactly.
if we ever cover the Cars movies, God help us, because this is the sort of shite we're going to be talking about the entire time. So yeah,
isn't there a theory about the Cars movie that it's like a post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear fallout world or something?
I think the only reason I've gotten into the weeds a bit with it here is because it is so directly tied to Woody's arc, because whatever his backstory is would actually impact the premise of this movie and the things he's talking about in this movie. Do you know what I mean? His emotional journey in this movie would actually be tied to that. If the backstory is that he belonged to another child of any kind prior to Andy, which seems likely based on the timeline, then it feels weird that doesn't come up. But yeah, I mean, you just got to sort of go, magic toys that come into life. I guess there's rules where if they move on to a different kid, they forget the old kid. Although when they go to Bonnie, they don't forget Andy. So I don't know, whatever. Anyway, I've got a big question for you, because I do have a thing. Because you said that it's kind of close to a perfect movie. You couldn't think of much to criticize it for. I do have a criticism of this movie that bothers me every time, and it is quite a vague and it's a nebulous concept. But it's to do with... How do I phrase it? I can't even think of a way to describe this. But I want your thoughts on it, because I'm not settled on whether it's a big deal breaker for me or not. The de-escalating of the dangers and consequences of being outside of the house. Because in the first movie, being a lost toy is a huge deal. Being outside of the house is a huge deal. You will never get home. At the end of that movie, when the RC car runs out of batteries and they're on the road and the moving van is moving away and they've left Andy's house so they can't even go back there, they don't know where that car is going, they're never going to get back there, it's treated like death. It's treated like the end. They solve that problem with the rocket and getting Buzz and Woody into the car, but not after a real moment of gravity about that being the situation. In this movie, it's like the guy that does those pitch meetings What, they're going to just go around at Al's toy barn? Yeah, barely an not a problem, barely an inconvenience, We're just going to go to Al's toy barn. Cool. Oh, we're going to go across the road to his apartment. Cool. We're going to get into his apartment. Cool. We're going to go to the airport. All right, I guess. Now we're going to get back from the airport we're going to get back to Andy's house from the airport. Will that be a problem? No, it'll be barely an inconvenience. Like, this movie, I think, hurts the subsequent movies for that. Because this movie makes being out in the world such a non-issue that they never get to play in that world of tension again. And they try. Desperately. I remember the third one has a lot of that tension because it becomes about them being lost at that kindergarten, like that place where the kids are playing with the toys, right? But yeah, I don't know. They're being held there in that movie. The idea is that, well, if we can get out of here, we can just get back to Andy. Which is I don't know.
The airport. I'm going to try and counter it, or try and find a way to hopefully ease it a little bit for you. So the airport. I'll give you the airport one is hard in terms of, like, especially as we don't see any, like, it's just like we should go home and we don't see any world in terms of how. I think.
Well, the movie does explain physically how, just not how they found it. Like we know how they did it. They obviously did it on the airport luggage carrier, which is then found outside Andy's house very amusingly the next morning, which is a great joke.
Yeah,
which I love.
Yeah, I mean in terms of how they find their way there.
Yeah.
In terms of the rest of the movie, I think one, you can argue that Toy Story made them a bit less scared of that sort of stuff, of going outside. Their previous adventures have slightly informed that, and it seems more achievable now. In terms of Owls and back, they have a map. It's established that they've got a map, and the jeopardy of Toy Story and the reason it's like we need to get back to the moving truck and that moment is played as so downbeat is because they don't know where they're going. They don't know where they're moving to. They don't know where the new house is. So it's slightly different here because they know where they need to get back to. Like, it's not. It's, they can get back. There's a deadline on it because they've got to be back by Andy's return. But in terms of the comparison to the moment of Toy Story 1, if they miss that truck, they've got literally no idea where that family, where Andy, where the toys have gone. In this, they have a airport aside, between the house and Al's toy barn, they've got a map, and they know they need to. The family aren't going to move. If they can get back to the house, they can get back to Andy. So it's less of a serious, if we don't get back before the moving truck goes, we've got no fucking idea where the new house is, where Andy is, where any of it is.
But in that first one, there's almost even if they knew where to go, it would be a long shot. Like, even when they're in the house next door, it's a problem. Right? You know what I mean? I just feel like when the way this movie has them move around with little concern for that being much of a challenge, and it explains it to some degree. Like you said, they have a map to Al's toy barn, and the movie does do a scene where they're like, this is taking ages. And then it does the thing where they have to cross the road, which is like, they try to give it tension. It has zero tension. At no point did I feel like they were going to get squished by that truck. And it's played as a joke, to be honest with you. I mean, that moment when they're like, success, we got across the road. Well done, guys. And it pulls back and all the cars have crashed. It's a funny joke. But all of this adds up to devaluing any future ability to create tension with this. And it actually, I think, my bigger criticism, I guess, more specific criticism, is that the airport chase at the end of this movie has zero tension to it for me. I'm just like, yeah, okay, they're going to look, they've come this far, they'll get Jesse, they'll find a vehicle, they just drove a fucking van. The toys in the first movie would never have driven a car. I'll put it that way, right? We've slightly maybe we haven't jumped a shark, but we have stepped over it. You know what I mean? Like, we've crossed a threshold.
Yeah.
We can't uncross that threshold now. We've had toys driving a car. No. There's no tension to any of that ever again.
Yeah, and look, to some degree, like, because also they don't do not so much. Well, even at Andy's house, like, there's, they're playing cards and the cards are abandoned where they are. And I'm like, is Andy not going, who's been in my room playing cards? And obviously there's like the boxing stuff, you know what I mean? The non-edible what's-it style foam that's like everywhere, and is Al not going, hold on a second? And obviously the shop gets destroyed, and that would arguably have security cameras. So yeah, they definitely are playing faster and looser with it. I think some elements of it...
But little things like that won't really have any impact on like overall enjoyment of the film, right? Because those little moments might take you out of it for a second, but they're not going to have any impact going forward. The stuff I'm talking about, I think, really hurts the tension of the last act of this movie and the next two. Because you don't, the third one has to go really extreme to make you feel a sense of tension and threat. Like, think about what the third one has to do to actually get you to a place of tension following this movie's airport hijinks. Which, again, is a fun sequence. I'm not denying the entertainment value of the sequence. I want to make that very clear. I'm entertained. When Stinky Pete, like, gets out of his box and he gets picked up by that girl, that's funny. I like watching Bullseye, a thing with legs less than an inch long, keeping up with a plane. That's funny to me. But it's just, there's no tension to it anymore, and it's just all gone, and it's gone for nothing. Like, we don't gain anything from it other than the movie is entertaining in those moments. I just feel like they made a sacrifice there that has an impact on the larger property, and it's a shame. And that's the one thing Empire Strikes Back doesn't do. So if I am going to put a criticism into this movie, I think, if we're saying it's like almost a perfect sequel, which in almost every way it is, the one thing it does do that hurts the movies around it is that element. For me. I'm not saying that's a problem.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It wasn't a problem for me. I think to some degree, like I said earlier, the adventures of the first movie can give them a certain amount of confidence. But I see what you're saying completely, and like certainly as well the fact that they can just cause so much destruction in the world means that it means that, well, what's the jeopardy in them doing anything like that again? Because seemingly they're just not getting seen or caught, and they start playing fast and loose with that right away, where Woody goes and rescues. I know he's doing a lot of effort to hide, but he's hiding from one side. Like, what about the people literally on the other side of the dog or the table or anything like that?
And even there, that was the sign of things had changed, because Woody just gets from the bedroom to the yard in like with ease and in seconds. Remember in Sid's house when he couldn't even like get downstairs because there were people moving around, there was a dog, like there was all these obstacles. Like, the only safe space he has is like if he's in a room alone, like Andy's bedroom. And he just really easily is just like, right, I'm in the yard saving Wheezy on my way back up. Like it's just like the ease of movement in the world is just so different to the first movie, and I just feel like that's a lot of thrown away potential of tension there. I like the yard sale idea, and look, again, every one of these scenes that we're pointing this out as hurting the tension are funny and entertaining. One of my favourite jokes in the entire movie is "keep it casual," and then the dog walks funny and he says, "not that casual." It's an amazing, it's an amazing joke. And of course, it's a much better reason for Woody to be in the yard sale because the original version of Woody in the yard sale was even sillier. For some reason, he was on the roof, and he slips off the roof and lands in a box. Like, that was the original reason Woody was in the yard sale for the first version of this movie.
The way they do it is so much better, especially that tension of, because you just don't know whether Andy's mum actually would sell him, and like that creates like a real good tension.
Well, they did that well, because what they did was they had her say to Andy, toys don't last forever. And then she put him on the shelf with Wheezy, where she'd sort of done the same thing, essentially. She'd said to Andy, we'll fix him. And then she'd shoved him up there, waited a little bit of time until Andy had basically forgotten about him, and now was putting Wheezy in this yard sale. So you're like, well, how many steps away is Woody from that position as a broken toy also? Although we learn pretty quickly she does value Woody and how much joy Woody brings Andy. So because she very deliberately doesn't sell him. And
like you say, according to certain theories, reminds her of a deceased husband. So
yes. Well, yeah, yeah. I really like another element of this film that I think is really great is the choice to have the new improved Buzz switch with our Buzz, so we can still have without actually reverting the character growth from Buzz of last movie. We get to have silly Buzz Lightyear that thinks everything is real for a bit again, and that's just delightful. And the ways in which they do that going forward get sillier. I feel like there's a really funny joke in the next one where they reset Buzz and they make him Spanish for a bit or something. My memory of the next one is a bit foggy, but like I'm sure they do something similar. But I really like that we get to explore that again. I love funny, clueless Buzz that thinks Zurg is real and all that stuff. That's all great.
Yeah, again, the plotting's really the script of this movie is really great and really concisely put together. You know, the opening of this epic sequence that turns out to be the game, and then Rex and trying to get Buzz and defeat Zorg. And the way that all comes together, and not only do you have the Buzz toy, but you have the Zorg toy, like, and then the Star Wars parody is just a fun gag.
Yeah,
especially
the amount
it
of Star Wars parodies in this movie is absolutely obscene. It's crazy how much Star Wars stuff.
How
in
it
this
escalates
movie.
from obviously the I'm your father to just I'm gonna play. It's very early for me. Apologies. I'm gonna play tennis with my dad. I'm gonna play ball with my dad.
Oh my god, that bit is so funny.
So
like
funny.
I knew that joke was coming, but I still couldn't. I died. I absolutely died. He was like,
so good.
"Oh, you're the best dad," but Buzz is just like, "Cool, I guess they're happy. Great, we can move on." And of course, as we all know, Zurg isn't Buzz's dad. He's a future timeline version of Buzz. Obviously, we all know this now. It's been proven.
Well,
Anyway.
I didn't because I've not seen that film, but
I wouldn't worry about it.
I will say though, I did when in the game, because I remembered that opening sequence is a game, and I'm like, presumably Buzz should sound like Chris Pine here. So I did.
Is it Chris Pine? It's Chris Evans.
Is it Chris Pine?
It's Chris Evans.
That was Chris Evans. There you go. I was like, well, presumably, I got it wrong because I said Chris Pine, but like, why is this Buzz got the wrong voice?
Yeah, it's true. I think it could. I can fansplain it if you want. I think in the movie they got the big A-list actor to voice him or be him if it's supposed to be live action. And for the toys and video games, they had to get they couldn't afford to bring in the A-list movie star to do Buzz, so they got the guy that voices the toys in the video games is the same guy. And that's actually particularly funny because the toys and video games relating to Toy Story, Tom Hanks never does those voices. He lets his brother do it.
Yeah.
So,
and just makes. I've not seen it, but oh man, Lightyear.
So,
just when you have to explain so much what a movie is, like, well, you see, it's the movie the characters of Toy Story would watch. What?
It's really confusing. And I will say as well, what's really frustrating about that movie is I think the first sort of like 30, 40 minutes of that movie are actually incredible. Like I didn't see that movie in theaters. I saw it when it came to Disney Plus. And I was like, let's see what this is about then. Let's see what a mess this is, because everyone told me so. And I was like 30, 40 minutes in, like, this is amazing. Is everyone high? Like, what's wrong with everyone? And then the movie just takes an absolute dive. It's incredible how quickly that movie goes from being really good to really bad. Like, I don't think I can think of a movie quite so splittable into, this is all good, and now it's all shit. Like, it's like right like there. There's like you could snip that movie right down the middle, and you'd have there's one half that is good and one half is bad. Anyway, don't worry about it, everyone. It's not worth your time.
Do you think, and I don't necessarily think this, but for the sake of nitpicking, and if anyone's thinking we're nitpicking a lot, it's hard with a movie like this sometimes
So
because you
good.
can't just go, the voice acting's amazing, wasn't this scene great, and just repeat jokes, because it's all amazing. And so, like I say, the script in particular, and I guess that was the last kind of point we were making. The script in particular, and the plotting and the interweaving of the script is fantastic. Do you think we need that moment where Ao gets to Tokyo? And I know we see him crying in the chicken suit with the adverts later, but do you think we need the moment where he opens up that case in Tokyo? I think it's Tokyo he's going to, or is it just Japan?
No, I think it is Tokyo. I think he says Tokyo. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't have that
think
moment
we need
currently, unless I missed
No,
it.
but do you think we need that moment?
Yeah, for a minute I thought I'd missed a scene. I was like, what?
No. I'm saying, do you
yeah.
think we need that? As in, do you think it would have been gratifying to see him open it and realize they're not there?
I was almost expecting that moment, but also the movie's from the toys' perspective. That would be the only scene in the entire movie not from the toys' perspective. The only way you could do that scene is if Stinky Pete got left in there, and then you have Stinky Pete getting opened up. But I wouldn't want to lose Stinky Pete being found by that girl that's an artist, because that's just the perfect ending for Stinky Pete. So I'm okay with the way they did it. I think that makes perfect sense. There's a little part of me that yearned for just a little more watching him be miserable, because he was such a piece of shit. I mean, do you know how many times during the movie I turned to Nadia and was like, Newman? You know, like I was so...
Yeah, but I have to say that's the other brilliant thing about the script of this movie. Like, whether you like them or agree or not, both villains in this film, Ao and Stinky Pete, you can see where they're coming from. You understand where they're coming. Ao doesn't know these are real toys. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you could understand and see. Neither of them are like villainous they're not evil for the sake of evil. Like, they both have their reasons. Like,
yeah, 100%. Because, and I think what's really interesting is you contrast that to Jesse. I think if you contrast the Prospector's arc with Jesse's, I think it's really interesting because Jesse has arguably more right to be cynical and cruel and selfish than Pete does. You know? Because she had a kid that abandoned her. He was never chosen, right? And that sucks, for sure. But that's all he's ever known. He doesn't know the joy the other characters had. Jesse did. And that sequence, the When Somebody Loved Me, is heartbreaking.
Ugh.
And to sneak another little bit of trivia in, because why not? You know, when Tom Hanks and the other guy, Tim Allen, sat down to watch footage from the movie and they saw that scene, they both wept. And I don't fucking mind them. It's heartbreaking. And what's really funny is Randy Newman expressed concern over that young children particularly, wouldn't have the patience to sit through a 3-minute ballad. And he was wrong. And I think the only reason he wanted to do that is because he just wanted to do the music himself. He didn't like there was someone else doing music for Toy Story. He was like, can I not come in, you know, when she loved me, when she loved me, you know, doing his usual weird Randy Newman offbeat nonsense. I think that scene is so powerful, and it's so beautifully animated, and the song is so perfect. And honestly, if the movie had revealed Jesse was the villain the way it later reveals Stinky Pete's the villain, I wouldn't have been surprised. That's a villain origin story. And it is delightful they don't go that way. And Joan Cusack is so good in this movie.
So good.
Considering this character was added to the movie as late as they were, and we'll get into that later, Joan Cusack could not have had a lot of time to prep this performance. This character was invented 9 months out from the release. I just want to make that clear.
That's crazy.
Yeah, we'll come to it. But Joan Cusack will have had almost no time whatsoever to get her head around this and deliver this performance. And it is absolutely bursting with heart and joy and excitement and sadness and all of the things it needs to be. And as much as I can sit here and tell you the whole cast of this movie are great, which they are, I cannot get over Joan Cusack when I rewatched it this time. And I would take this moment to point out what a great character arc Jessie has and how well she delivers it. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And it is it's such a heartbreaking scene. I'm rewatching it this time you watch it as a kid, it's sad. It's even sadder when you're an adult. Because, I've also lost. My youth is as dead as their relationship with that other girl. You know what I mean? Like, I'm watching my childhood go, that's me driving away as an adult and I've thrown all my toys in a bin. You know what I mean? Like, it's harder when you're an adult.
I don't know, dude. I felt almost smug. There's a point where he's like, where Stinky Pete is like, what's he gonna do? Take you to graduation? Take you on honeymoon? And I'm like, I did take my toy on honeymoon.
You know what's funny about that is what I did say to Nadia, like, actually you could write, when you do like those like short one sentence like Netflix like synopses that are really like obscenely short, so they almost make no sense. Woody feels rejected when he realizes Andy won't take him on his honeymoon. Could be the plot of this movie.
That's good. That's good.
And while we're on
I've realised the sentence. I've realised the sentence. I did take my toy on honeymoon. sounds dodgier than I intended it to.
Well, I should clarify as a person who attended your wedding, there was a theme of the connection you and Jess have because you both have your childhood teddy bears. Yeah. So so the fact that I assume both teddy bears took the trip.
No, Jess is much less. Jess is a bit more. No, that's unnecessary than I am. Although maybe I think I might have taken both because of that. I can't remember for sure, but I think maybe yes because I was
so Jess's teddy bear when yours got back sang "When She Loved Me" to yours, like telling the story of watching you pack Teddy Tom while she had to stay behind.
Mate, I worry about Jess's teddy bear's feelings about it all more than I care to say.
Let's talk about the other sort of a big scene that I particularly, just because I just want to I'm just going to cover it now and then but I'm a huge fan. One of my favorite Pixar shorts is Jerry's Game, so it will surprise absolutely no one to discover that the scene where the repairman, who is the model for Jerry from Jerry's Game, I don't know if it's supposed to be Jerry or not, comes in and fixes Woody. I love everything from the music to how artistically it's animated. There's just something very cathartic about watching him repaint and clean up Woody. I don't know. It's like I don't know. I can't even explain why that scene is so good.
Yeah,
but I love it every time, and I really love that.
That's very satisfying. It's a precursor to videos of swimming pools getting cleaned on Instagram.
Or the guys who use those jet washers to clean like pavements.
Yeah. There's just something very satisfying about it.
Yeah, but this guy didn't do it right because he didn't say, "Hey guys, it's Jerry 453 here. Today we're fixing up this classic Woody toy from the 50s. Look at this grime line." He didn't do that. So, that's all I'm saying.
Do you think we needed his arm to get re-broken? Because if Andy's willing to go, "Oh, thanks, Mum, you got me new toys," is he not also potentially going to go, "Oh, you fixed Woody, thanks"? I think it's sweeter that Andy fixes him.
That was my defense of that. I think I like that Andy gets to fix him. I like that Andy gets to fix him himself because it shows how much Andy, because you could be forgiven, right? This is a movie with what I call a end the movie moment early on, where there's a scene that if it plays out just very slightly different, the whole movie doesn't happen. And it's that moment when Woody first gets torn, and she's like, "Well, you can bring him, we can fix him on the way." He's like, "No, just leave him." And if he hadn't said no, just leave him, the movie doesn't happen at all. Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is they then reveal at the end of the movie that his thinking was, "I don't have time to fix him properly. I don't need to get more broken. I'm going to wait, and I'll fix him properly when I get home. And that's actually really sweet and really nice. And I think both on a practical level of Andy then not raising questions, although, he should be raising questions. He's gained 2 new toys mysteriously. And there's a display on his bed that his mum didn't put there. But I like that they do that. I think there's a nice symmetry to it, and I really like that Andy fixes him. And I need to keep an eye out. In the next movie, does Woody still have that sort of weird bulge in his arm now?
I can't remember.
Yeah, I'll have to look out for that.
But I mean, if you're being too if you're being too pedantic about that, then the difference between Bo Peep between this movie and Toy Story 4 is probably a bigger concern.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. Well, Bo Peep doesn't have a big role in this one. She's present briefly. She doesn't do a whole lot. Neither does Mrs. Potato Head. You know, I was sad about that because the last movie introduces Mrs. Potato Head right at the end, and the dog, and then it feels like the guys who are making this movie were just like, yeah, we don't really want to use either of those. Like, we'll include them at the beginning.
I think the dog,
because they should be there.
The dog was used well. The dog, especially because the dog was a threat at the end of the last movie, having them all hide from the dog, and it turns out that it's just a game Woody and they play with him. I thought that was good. I thought that was satisfying.
I also enjoy that Woody has the dog better trained than Andy. Like, Woody says stick him up, and the dog does stick him up, and then Andy does it, and the dog doesn't react. That's one of those gags that, like, I think I missed as a kid. I don't think I realised that was, like, the way that was set up, but it's very funny.
I thought that was very funny, yeah.
I also really enjoyed the gag when Woody gets into the 25-cent box, and I think Slinky says, "You're worth more than that, Woody." Oh, I also really love the gag of Newman. I know he's not Newman, he's Al. But when he's like, all the way to work, and then he just crosses the road. It's a very Seinfeld moment. Like, it's a good... Yeah. Yeah, that's a George Costanza moment right there. How do we feel then? I mean, we talked about the action scene at the end. I talked a lot about how I didn't find there to be much tension in it. I don't think we got your sort of perspective on it. How did you find the whole ending? The airport stuff.
It's great. And as a kid, the bag carousels, the sort of world behind the airport, and all those kind of manic scrawling lines really captured my imagination. I think it's a visual that works really well still. And I think it's really imaginative, and really kind of, you can look at it 2 ways. Either that airport's just got the worst security, the worst sort of, the most illogical bag system in the world, or that's that from a toy's perspective, which is quite fun. Maybe, especially given the lack of urgency in the outside world, which we've already talked about. Maybe it's less that, and it is just like the sprawlingness. But I remember watching that as a kid and being really captivated by that. For me, there is some tension in the actual end, on the plane, because if that plane takes off, they're fucked. So I felt some tension there, and obviously I really like Woody going to get Jessie and saving her. I think, like you, Stinky Pete is sort of resolved really nicely and really cleanly. So I think, that works too. So, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, the plane thing didn't feel tension because I was just like, well, they'll just get on another plane. Like, they'll just sneak around like they've done easily at all of the points in this movie, and just use the baggage carousels in Japan, and get on the board, in the baggage of someone else's luggage, getting on a plane going back to America. Like, I just feels like they. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I just felt like that wouldn't be too much trouble for them. But yeah, I can see that working for someone. It sadly didn't work for me. But yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed all the Al's Toy Barn stuff. Meeting Barbie and the Rock'em Sock'em robots. My only question in that sequence was where did they get the extra Buzz Lightyear box to put our Buzz in? Did they just have empty boxes knocking about?
Or was fake Buzz already? Was the other Buzz already out by then?
Yeah, he was on display. He was like a display model, wasn't he? In like a case.
Oh yeah, he was. You're right.
So I don't know where they got that box that they put our buzz in from. But that's a nitpick. But it's a we just went to Nitpick Corner. Didn't even realize it. We passed Nitpick Corner, Chris. We were just sort of walking through. We did it.
This cutting into Triv now, as I like to do this episode. Is this some sort of Triv? Because obviously Barbie very much not in the first movie. Mm-hmm. In this one, is that Mattel going? Oh, you know what? might be some good promotional opportunities to be in one of the biggest films of the year.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So early drafts of the original film did have a Barbie doll. It was actually in the Little Bo Peep role. Mattel refused the license to Disney. After the huge popularity of the movie, and obviously the big boost in sales to toys like Mr. Potato Head, Slinky Dogs, and other related toys, even the Little Army Men had a boost in sales following the first film. They then decided to allow Barbie to appear in this one, so they released in conjunction with this movie a tour guide Barbie as an exclusive doll that ties in with this film. And clearly that did well, because obviously Barbie and Ken both have quite large roles in Toy Story 3. And I think there's a funny line when they're running around Al's toy barn that I think is like a dig at two situations at once. There's a point when tour guide Barbie says, back in 1995, short-sighted retailers did not order enough dolls to meet demand. I think this is a joke on two things. I think this is a joke at Mattel for not allowing Barbie to be in the original movie and pointing out how well it sold. But I think it's also a dig at a real thing that happened, which is that nobody thought this movie would be a big hit, the first one. So no one stocked up on Buzz and Woody toys that were being produced to be released on line with the movie. And nobody stocked up on Slinky Dogs or Mr. Potato Heads or any of the shit that's from that movie. And as a result, they all sold out immediately. So that line really is great from Tour Guide Barbie, because it is a very fun little dig from the developers, the producers of the movie, to the toy companies. They did not miss out, I will say, with this one. Everyone was very ready, I think, for the second movie to make money. But you're absolutely right. Barbie was not allowed to be in the first movie. And I think it's really interesting to think of a world like an alternate reality, like a Portal Gun moment, where we go to the reality where they did let Barbie be in the first movie, and the Bo Peep character is replaced by Barbie throughout the franchise. Or our Barbie, I should say. That's an interesting thought and a very different scenario.
Yeah, because I don't think Mattel, and also I don't think the creators of Toy Story. I love where they went with Bo Peep. I don't think that was planned. I don't think they were like, right, let's write her out of this one and then we can bring her back in a future one and do this. Not. I think that was just happy accidents. But I don't think Mattel would have allowed Barbie to not be in the third movie.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, correct. And look, I'll be honest with you, like, I saw a couple of scenes from the third movie the other day on, like, Instagram or TikTok, and their version of Ken and Barbie is brilliant. Like, really funny. And I think a little bit laid the groundwork for what they then do, what then happened this year with or last year, I should say now, with the Barbie movie. You know, I'm not saying the characters are written the same, they're written very differently, but that tongue-in-cheek approach to the Ken Barbie dynamic is you know, I definitely think with Mattel loosening their strict use of Barbie to have a version of the character that kind of makes fun of her and Ken, I think that Toy Story 3 is really where that starts. And I think without that, maybe you don't get the movie we got more recently. So yeah, I thought there was a ton of fun stuff in the toy store. I really enjoyed most of the things that happened there. One of my other favorite gags in the whole movie, by the way, is the other deluded Buzz and his anti-grav. It's so good.
Oh yeah, where it's like, because that's in the apartment, isn't it? In the apartment
on the lift.
block.
Yeah, it's just after they left the toy store. The toy store, yeah.
Oh, it's so good. It's so well done.
I have a question for you.
It's such a logical place for.
Oh, go on.
Go on. No, I was just saying, it's such a logical place for them to go to extend this world. A toy store, like, it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's really good. I had a question about, and this is a nitty gritty logistics Toy Story world thing, so we'll do this quickly because we said we wouldn't get into many of these. But is there something wrong with the factory that produces the Buzzes, that they all come out delusional? Like, all of the Buzz and Zurg and Buzz Lightyear related toys appear to be delusional. But that
are they
doesn't...
the only toys?
Well, you're asking the question I was about to ask, but I don't know. Is that exclusive to them? We only ever see it with them.
Well, they're the only toys we ever see, apart from arguably Stinky Pete, but he has come out and gone back in. That's established, or at least it's established that he can do that. They're the only toys we've really seen unwrapped.
But there's a whole toy store of
But
the Rock'em Sock'em Robots, the Barbies. They seem to be at least a
yeah, but
bit
the
aware.
Rock and the Rock and Sock'ems are out. They're like set up.
Yeah.
The Barbies are out, aren't they? Like we don't unpackaged.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
not
right.
sure. I could be wrong, but
No,
unpackaged, I'm not sure. And obviously, the only other toy that we sort of see fresh, as it were, is the the toy in Toy Story 4, and they also have an identity crisis. Woody has to yell, "You're a toy" at someone else. Oh no,
Yeah.
they yell at Woody in that one, don't they? I don't
Yeah.
know, I can't remember.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
But no, I think the buzzes. There is something with the buzzes. Like,
Yeah,
because
they
you can't-
do seem-
they're just
they-
doing that.
They do seem
They're doing that every
extraordinarily
time.
deluded.
Yeah, and the notion that every time a toy is unwrapped, they wouldn't have reacted that way to Buzz if they go through the shit every time. Like,
Right, that's a good point. The other toys aren't like they're almost confused by it. Yeah, you're right. And if that happened every time a new toy came in, they had to explain who they were. Then the first movie doesn't happen because they wouldn't.
Yeah.
They'd know what was wrong with Buzz.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This movie raises loads of questions, as all these sort of Pixar movies do. Again, it's too much of in the weeds to get into it. But Bullseye licking the what's it dust off, or the cheese puff dust off of Al's hand raises the question of did the toys eat? Which I don't think I want to answer.
Yeah, same. I thought that was I love that gag, but
Yeah.
I was like, wait, so is he hungry? Like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
I also think that they didn't look they up close. That did not look like a high quality brand of what's it's.
No, I think Al is cheaped out on that. I mean, he strikes me as the kind of guy that buy a cheap brand of cheese puffs.
Yeah, the cheese. That's why he wanted. That's why he was so desperate to find Woody, so he could afford some better what's it's, some on brand.
Honestly,
What's-Its.
I think even
But
I think even when he gets money, he's gonna go for the cheap ones.
the cheese dust ratio on those things was appalling.
It was appalling. You're not wrong. I really liked the return of our Pizza Planet aliens and the Pizza Planet van. I mean, I don't like that they drove the van around, but it's really funny to see them back.
Yeah, I thought that was done very well.
Other little details: Buzz giving the "Live Long and Prosper" sign from Star Trek to the other Buzz as he leaves him. I thought that was great. Small but very nice moment. My favorite line delivery in the whole movie from my notes, and I made a real point of this, is Tom Hanks delivering, "If the boot fits." I don't know if someone was like winding him up and they were like, "Now put more emphasis on the T. More emphasis on the T. Just a little more, Tom. Can we get some more emphasis on the T?" Until it was like a joke and then they used it anyway. I don't know, but it's brilliant. I like it.
The animation, the animation of that delivery as well was
good.
fantastic.
So good. So good. I also, one of my other favourite jokes in the movie, and I know we're just listening to jokes at this point, but it's one of my absolute favourites. And this is one of the things I want to talk about this movie, is just how good the gag ratio is and how funny it is just so consistently. It's Pig being like, there's no way they're getting that kind of mileage when he's reading the owner's manual of the pizza van. Such... Yeah, I wrote it down. I seriously doubt he's getting this kind of mileage. Is such a good joke. I was really pleased with that.
I think it might be funnier than the first film. For sure. I think there's more gags in this film.
I think this might be the funniest Toy Story movie. I think really it's very strong on that front. And it's just lots of little details, just so packed in. Like even that thing with Al where he's like, gotta do this, gotta do that, gotta have a shower. We'll skip the shower. Like it's just a small moment, but it tells you something about the character, but it's funny too, and you're like, you're laughing. Like this movie is definitely as funny as the first one, if not funnier, I think.
For me, the main one for Al for that, I know you've already mentioned it, but it makes me laugh every time. It is, for me, I've got to go all the way to work.
Yeah,
And
it's
he
a
just
great, it's
crosses
such a
the
good
road.
joke.
Especially as they sort of bring it back with Buzz's reaction to him driving away, and the way Buzz is just then like, oh.
Yeah.
When he literally just crosses the road.
Yeah. I love Wheezy singing a song at the end. That made me laugh as well. And having a great voice now. He's got his squeaker replaced. That made me laugh.
Yeah. Although I had to watch this last night, so I was watching that very early in the morning, and at that point I was like, I'm worried I'm asleep and this is a dream. Do you think?
That's fair.
Do you think just the whole? Oh yeah, no, they found a spare squeaker. It's like, I suppose it's fine. There's way more coincidences out there.
Yeah, it's not great, but look, I'm happy that all the characters get a happy ending, with the exception of Stinky Pete and Al. Everyone gets a happy ending, even Little Wheezy, and I think that's okay, even if it's just a quick line and a gag, and it's a funny gag. We haven't talked about Kelsey Grammer. I should say Kelsey Grammer as the Prospector or Stinky Pete, incredible, so good.
Yeah, so good.
I love the way they brought Bullseye to life as well. We haven't really talked about Bullseye. He's just like a big dog, wagging his tail and being excitable. I love Bullseye. His big, sad eyes.
Did we name, because we praised the character a lot, but did we actually name the actress who plays Jessie?
Yeah, it's Joan. What's her face? I talked Joan Cusack. I said her name when I praised the work earlier.
Ah, okay.
Why?
Because I'll be honest, when you said that, I thought I must have not been paying attention to the fact that we were still on Jessie, because I thought you said John Cusack, and my genuine reaction in my head was, I didn't know John Cusack played Stinky Pete.
Wow.
I could have sworn that was Kelsey Grammer.
Yes, it's very much Kelsey Grammer, because he's doing a whole Sideshow Bob thing, which Nadia pointed out, like, actually, Stinky Pete really is just Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons. He was part of an old TV show where he was the comic relief, but he's actually a bit of a thespian himself. He's kind of like a slightly posh, like, he's very well spoken, but the character was made to be humiliated in the TV show, and now is villainous as a result of it. It's the Prospector and Sideshow Bob are pretty similar, both voiced by Kelsey Grammer, and he's brilliant at that. I'll give him credit where credit's due. But yeah, no, Joan Cusack voices Jessie and does a wonderful job, and Kelsey Grammer great as the Prospector.
I know. If you got more, I know we're cutting into Triv again, but if you got more Triv then on like what the Prospector was originally, how they introduced that character so late, and all that stuff.
Yes. Well, no, it's
let's do that.
No, that's trust me, that's a whole story. Okay. We'll come to it. Trust me. Jessie and the Prospector were both introduced with 9 months left to go. There was a version of the Prospector in the earlier version of the film, and there was a version of Jessie, but she wasn't Jessie. She was called Senorita Cactus. We'll come to it. It's a whole thing. Anyway, I'll hit a couple of quick notes, and then I've got one last big thought that'll be a discussion before we get into the trip. Is that okay? So, very quick notes. I wrote down, if I were Buzz, I'd be embarrassed the rest of the toys couldn't tell the difference between me and the other guy.
I doubt Buzz is thinking about it that deeply, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
No. In Woody's dream sequence, it's pretty obvious it's a dream sequence immediately because they're all holding the exact same card. And I love the way they hinted at that before they actually then reveal it properly. I thought that was fun. If you look carefully, you notice they're all on the same card. The flip of Buzz telling Woody he's a toy in this movie and reminding him of that, and Buzz explaining how Woody taught him the value of being with kids and being played with, is incredible. Just top tier stuff. Brilliant writing. Excellent character work from both Buzz's perspective of his growth from the first movie and then Woody's journey through this movie. Top tier. Woody's arc in this movie is amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
It makes so much sense that he would have doubts about Andy after the way that things were left. You buy all of it. It's really well done. Really well done.
Well, here's a thought for discussion purposes on that.
Mm-hmm.
Does he flip flop too quickly? Because him choosing not to go and fighting with Bugs and saying I'm not going, and then changing his mind comes very quick. No, they get away with it. They get away with it with the footage of Andy's dad picking Woody up, because obviously that's what's going on in that. But also Buzz's speech. The combination of those two things, I think, means it does work.
Yeah, I think it's Buzz's speech, and then him watching the footage and seeing, hearing "You Got a Friend in Me" and seeing how much that kid, and then what I think. There's something to be said for my big point, actually, that leads straight from this. If we're talking about their arcs and we're talking about that, one thing I had a question for you is the big note this movie ends on, and it's a perfect note to end this movie on, but it raises questions about where this franchise goes. Woody says to Buzz at the end of this movie, I wouldn't want to miss any of it. Right? Sure, it's going to end someday, but I don't want to miss the stuff that happens between now and then. And then he adds, and when it all ends, I'll have Buzz Lightyear to keep me company to infinity and beyond. Or for infinity and beyond, I think he adjusts it. Knowing how Toy Story 4 ends, how are we feeling about that?
My memory of Toy Story 4 is that they do enough to justify it. And they do, they almost. To be honest with you, with that, my memory of Toy Story 4 is that they almost do more to justify why Woody goes, as opposed to why Buzz doesn't go with him. My memory of Toy Story 4 is that actually Buzz doesn't have a whole lot to do in that movie.
That is correct.
So I think they do enough to justify Woody's change on that because you could look at the Woody and Buzz of it all and go from that moment and go, oh, that goes away. But you could also look at that moment and go, fucking hell, I wanna see it all play out of it really sticks because Woody sees it all play out, but then in reality doesn't ever really get over Andy. And even when they have a new owner, it's actually still his feelings about Andy, which makes him go, ultimately makes him go, I can't be a kid's toy anymore because I can't be Andy's toy. So that moment, yes, there's the Woody and the Buzz where you go, oh, that changes. But then the Andy of it all in that moment, they really that really tracks as a character, arc. And Woody's, if Woody is in the glory days of him and Andy in that moment, when he says him and Buzz. But then we see him change his mind on that to some degree. If Buzz wanted to go with him in that, at the end of Toy Story 4, Woody would have Buzz there with him. Buzz doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about it, isn't it? It's at the end of this movie is it's not going to matter because we'll have each other, and then Andy does move on, and yeah, you're right. Woody can't get over it, and that is what's interesting. Yeah, well, interesting is in the seasons of Rewind reviews to come when we get to the sequels to this film, which we will. It'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. You're exactly right, but it is a perfect note to end this movie on. That in the end, what he realised is that they'll at least have each other when those days come. Whereas Jessie was very much, it seemed, on her own, in the way her I forgot the name, Emily, I think, left her. Jessie wasn't part of a big set of toys. She seemed pretty much to be on her own anyway. So she had nothing, and that is different and much sadder. My last quick note, just to compliment the film, on the reveal of the Prospector's motives and his switch to being evil. You see it coming a bit, but it works really well. The reveal that he was the one who turned on the remote, because you do genuinely, I think they do enough to make you believe Jessie might have turned that TV on and spooked out.
Yeah, you do in hindsight. Go was Jessie napping when the Prospector turned the telly on and shoved the remote in front of her?
I have always had a pet theory that when they go floppy and fall over, they are essentially asleep or unconscious to a degree. And there's an owner, I think when Andy comes into the room and they're just not being played with, I think they are unconscious to a degree. But then again, I guess that then what happens when Andy plays with them? Because they definitely
we've seen them break. Yeah, and we've seen Woody break that state for Sid and stuff like that.
So. Yeah, I guess she was just asleep then and missed it. Let's do the truth, Chris. God, we've got so much. So,
Let's triv it up.
I'm going to give you some trivia. And now, Chris, more often than not, a film's production, while interesting in small ways, follows a very standard path to being made within the studio system that is not particularly worth noting. But sometimes that journey to the big screen is more interesting than that. Sometimes the ending is removed because of a bad test screening. Sometimes the film is funded by credit cards the director lied to obtain. Sometimes the film has a whole section on its Wikipedia that is headed Troubled Production. And when that happens, Chris, it's time for our previously unofficial, but now official section, Story Time. Welcome to Story Time, Chris, because Robo wants an Oreo. I put quite a lot of research into this because I was struggling. I was hearing different stories and seeing different bits of trivia that seemed, on the surface, to contradict each other, and I could not, for the life of me, put the timeline of this together. Because there are several things people know about this movie. They know there was a story where, for a moment, it looked like the film had been lost mid-production. People are aware there was a shift when it went from being a straight-to-DVD movie to a theatrical movie. People know about these things, but the timeline of how all that played out, it's muddled. And when you start reading all the trivia, they seem to contradict each other. So I had to lay it all out and figure it out on a timeline. And the timeline genuinely goes year to year from 95 right to 99 when the movie is released. So we're going to start in 1995. So immediately, talk about the sequel happened within a month of the first one coming out, which is not surprising. Put your hand up if that shocked you. Oh, no one's hands are up? Yeah, I thought so. First one was a massive...
But I tell you what is shocking. The notion that it was ever going to be a straight-to-video sequel is shocking.
Well, let's talk about that. So Disney was seeing at the time... So it's worth... Actually, very quickly, just to establish this right up top. Disney do not own this movie. This was not... Well, they do now. At the time, they didn't own the movie outright. They were the distributor. Pixar were an independent company that were making the movie, and they were working with Disney to distribute it because they didn't have the infrastructure to distribute the movie themselves. So it's a joint agreement. Disney puts some money in, Pixar puts some money in, they make the movie, Disney gets some of the profits, Pixar gets some of the profits. It was a joint deal. And eventually, Disney gobbled up Pixar. But at this point, Steve Jobs is the CEO of Pixar. So... with that in mind, Disney was seeing a huge amount of success at this time as a result of Return of Jafar, a movie that could very well come up this season, with straight-to-DVD sequels, or straight-to-video sequels. Because what you do is you make them for almost nothing and split them out into the world. No one knows if they're any good or not. There aren't really trailers. You're not really spending money on marketing. Kids see it, tug on parents' arm, buy that. They made Return of Jafar for $5 million. It returned well over $100 million almost immediately.
Wow.
This was an extremely profitable process. The problem with the Pixar movies is they're a little more expensive. But the logic was, and they put out a statement in early... when was it? I've got the date on this. I read the press release when they announced this movie. We'll get to it because I've got it further down. So Disney were basically seeing huge success, and their chairman at the time, Joe Roth, liked the idea of doing the same for Toy Story 2. The logic being, we already have the assets, you've designed all the characters and all of the sets and all the settings. Because it's computer generated, you can just move them through the sets differently and we'll make a different movie, way less cost, and stick it straight out on DVD. The only question is, do we get Tom Hanks and Tim Allen back, or can we afford that if we're doing it? The whole point of it is that it's a cheap, sequel. I've already talked about that. I can skip to this point. So as most of Pixar's top talent were busy at the time on A Bug's Life, that was Andrew Stanton's project, and there was very early work happening on the project that would become Monsters, Inc. That's what Pete Docter was working on. John Lasseter, director of the first Toy Story, thought a straight-to-DVD project wasn't a terrible idea, and it would be a good idea, a good way to foster some young talent. So there was a guy called Ash Brannon, who had been an animator under Lasseter, who directed Toy Story 1, and he said, you know what, you can direct the straight-to-DVD Toy Story sequel. Go nuts. So in the original story for the direct-to-video sequel that they then cooked up across sort of 1996, because they basically Lasseter brought the idea to the table of like what happens to a toy if they then get abandoned. Is the toy's biggest fear not being played with? And Brannon brought to the idea this idea that Woody might be like a classic toy. You know, he really liked this idea that he's a collector's item and he might get stolen from a yard sale. So they put those ideas together and sort of brewed up this story. Now, in the original version, it's not massively different in structure, but I think in detail it's quite different. So, when Woody is still stolen by Al, but when he goes to Al's apartment, he meets an unnamed character who is essentially an equivalent to the Prospector. He's just an old man character. A Senorita Cactus, a Mexican dancer doll, and Bullseye, who would have been voiced by Martin Short and was a talking horse. The Prospector and Senorita Cactus were snobbish and sort of villainous characters who they were collector's items, so they treated Woody with disdain because he'd been previously owned by a child and played with, God forbid. So for a while, the plot would be Woody sort of succumbing to his ego and starting to see himself as an important collector's item and go along with them. And then after all the adventure of Buzz and the gang trying to get to him, it's Buzz and Bullseye that bring Woody back down to Earth. And the ending of the film is that there's a car chase where Woody, Buzz, and the rest of Andy's toys steal Al's car to escape, and Al pursues them in the Pizza Planet truck, which is kind of reversed in the finished film. And that's all it is, and that's the movie, right? It was probably only going to be about an hour and 10 minutes long. It was not supposed to be, like, it was a straight-to-DVD sequel. You know, it is what it is. And you can see a lot of the DNA of the movie it became in that, I think. But the characters were very different. So in early 1997, it became clear that all of Pixar's 300 members of staff would not be free to work on this project. They were all busy starting Monsters, Inc. and working on, in the height of production on Bug's Life. So Steve Jobs decided to shut down something called Interactive Productions Group, which is a subdivision that had produced 2 CD-ROM story games, like interactive games, the year before. Those games had had so much animation between them that they were actually roughly the length of the first film. So the 95 members of staff that had produced those, animators, art department, engineers, were all just like, well, now you're the Toy Story 2 production team. Enjoy.
That's mad.
Now, what's funny about that is the 2 interactive games they'd made were Toy Story games. So they were familiar with animating the Toy Story characters. They had access to all the assets. It wasn't a difficult transition, but they were not in the same building as the rest of Pixar. They were being overseen by Lasseter, but in a very sort of loose way, where they would send in what they were working on and he'd go, yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down. He was busy. He was acting as a producer, so he was, he was hands off to start with. I think he was, he'd approved the story initially with Brannon, but now they were off just making the thing they'd agreed to, so he wasn't as involved like day to day. Pixar announced the straight-to-DVD sequel on March 12th of 1997. That's the press release I actually read earlier today. They announced that the voice cast are coming back, so they'd clearly negotiated a reasonably cheap return for Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. And they talked about in the press release how cheap it would be to make it with just the assets from the first film. And they announced Brannon as the director. Production sort of sailed along for most of that year, 1997. And then in November, Disney executives Joe Roth and Peter Schneider got a screening of the story reels and a few bits of finished animation and were so impressed with the quality of the work, they started discussing theatrical. Now, I have written here Dan aside because I would like to add some context to this because I don't think that's accurate. This is purely my speculation, right? And I'm sure they sold it at the time as we were just so impressed with what you're working on. We just loved it so much, we're thinking theatrical. What I think happened is a Pixar sequel, even one reusing the assets from the predecessor, is still going to be way more expensive than the usual Disney straight-to-DVD effort.
Yeah.
Especially if you're adding Tim Allen and Tom Hanks to the mix. It's just the best way to mitigate risk in that situation is to stick it out theatrically. To compare, Return of Jafar, I mentioned earlier, cost $5 million to make. When all was said and done, this movie was $90 million. You could not risk just putting this out on DVD, right? And admittedly, at this stage in production, they wouldn't have known it was ultimately going to cost 90 million. So they were probably looking at 10, 20, 30 million. It's hard to know this early in, but they were certainly looking at a much bigger bill than Return of Jafar, and it needed to bring a lot more back to ensure that, right? So when they come in and they go, oh, we were just so bowled away by the artistry that this interactive video game team have pulled together this movie from a story John Lasseter and this guy came up with, in an afternoon or whatever. Like, there's no way. There's just no way that they were that impressed. I just don't believe it. Now, that is speculation. Who knows? But that's where I stand on it. Now we shift to 1998, the year before the movie comes out. And yeah, because it comes out at the end of 1999 in the end. The shift to theatrical was negotiated and signed in early 1998 with a stipulation that this did not count as one of the 5-movie deal Disney already had with Pixar, as it was a sequel. So they had to work out the language of that because there was actually a deal in place where Disney were going to make 5 movies with Pixar, and they didn't want this to count as one. So they were like, it's a sequel, it doesn't. And Pixar like, yeah, I guess, because they were already making it like on the side anyway. Like, it was already a separate project in a separate building, so they were just like, yeah, I guess so. So Steve Jobs announced that to the crew of the film on February the 5th. So imagine finding out the movie you were making for straight to DVD was now going to the theatre. Must have been a big moment for them. As the work progressed in 1998, Disney then slated the movie for a November 1999 release and started putting licensing, toy production, all of the things you'd want to put in place for a big release like this. Late 1998 saw a very interesting couple of incidents. The universe did not want this movie to release, basically. Incident 1 saw a person who has never been identified, who was clearing unneeded files from the servers over at Pixar, accidentally ran the deletion request on the root directory instead of the folder they were intending, and as these were shared servers, employees across the building started seeing files, assets, and animation disappear at an alarming rate. By the time the infamous bin/rm-r-f request had been stopped, 90% of the work done over the last 2 years was gone.
Wow.
So there's a guy who eventually became Pixar's chief technical officer called Oren Jacob, and he'd worked on this movie, and he told a really funny story of opening his files, and he was like, oh, here are the assets for, like, Woody. Oh, there's, like, 40 things in there. Cool. And then he refreshed it, and there were 4. And then he refreshed it again, and they were gone. And there was someone else that told the story of, like, opening the asset folder and seeing, like, ham, potato head, Rex, refreshing it, and then just seeing Rex. And basically everyone panicked, and eventually they pulled the plug on the computer that was running the request to delete all the files, and they had about 10% of the files left.
That's mad.
So they went into recovery mode, basically. They were running around trying to figure out, is the data still technically there? Because often when you delete data, it's not really gone. The computer's link to it is gone, but it still might technically exist. But they were failing to retrieve the files because they didn't have the database that told it where the files were, and it just wasn't all coming together. They were really struggling. Fortunately, Chris, and you will not believe the luck here, supervising technical director Galen Sussman had recently had a child. And you might be thinking, why is that relevant? Well, she had, in order to work from home, developed a way to copy the database for the film to her personal computer at home so she could remote work while looking after her newborn.
Which now would breach all sorts of data protection shit.
Yeah, she'd be fired. They then, when they found out what she'd done, they went to her home, covered her computer in blankets to protect it, and nursed it in the back of a car back to the studio. And after a few days of work, they managed to recover almost all of the lost data, save for the last couple of days of work before the incident had occurred. So they lost about 2 or 3 days' work and about a week in trying to figure it all out.
This is mad, right?
But unfortunately, Chris, it gets weirder because 1998 really was just the year for deleting this film from existence, because Pixar's bosses were growing increasingly unhappy with the film now it was going to be theatrical. When it was going to DVD and people weren't really going to be paying attention, and it was clearly just a cheap sort of like, we put this out to, keep the franchise going. People accepted this. This sort of move back then did not hurt your franchise, right? Disney put out hundreds of low-budget, low-effort sequels to all of their movies. Little Mermaid 2, Lion King 2. I know people love that one, but and very few of them are good. There's only a couple that are even watchable, in my opinion. But it didn't hurt the brand because parents didn't care. They were just buying that shit for their kids. But now this movie was going into theaters, and Pixar was scared. They were so unhappy with the film that when John Lasseter returned from the promotional tour in Europe for Bug's Life, because that released in December 1998. Now, keeping in mind, the movie is due out in November 99. We are less than a year away from release. They said, Lasseter, can you just take a look at what they're doing over here? Do you agree? And he watched the movie after the promotional tour for Bug's Life, and unfortunately did agree. He did not think the movie was working at all, which rang the final alarm bells for Pixar's upper executives. They rang Disney and were like, it's not working. We're going to have to redo the whole movie. And Disney were like, what are you talking about? That's insane. We have licensing agreements. There's toys being developed and a myriad of other stuff. There's literally no way to move this release date. So unless you can remake the movie in a few months, it ain't happening. Pixar were not willing to let the movie go out in the state it was and scrapped it with 11 months left until the release date. They brought Lasseter back in to get it on track. He brought some of the original film's creative team in and held a weekend retreat around the Christmas holidays, or the sort of holiday season in general, in 1998. I don't have the exact date. There were some people that had been working on the film up to that point, including director Ash Brannon, and a few other guys like Lee Ulrich. I never know how to pronounce that guy's name. Let me see it written down. Let me see where is his name. Have I written it down somewhere? I must have done. Lee Unkrich, who had also worked for Pixar for a long time. And they had a big retreat where they sat across a weekend and broke an improved version of the story of this movie. They kept the core ideas, but they made a bunch of changes. So the general structure was kept. And most of the characters were kept, which meant they could keep locations, because Al's Toy Barn appeared in the original version, Al appeared in the original version, obviously Woody, Buzz, all that stuff, had all appeared in the original version. So they could use all the assets that had been developed for the movie, because actually, one thing that is really interesting about this, and I read this a few times, was the one thing, these guys that made this, the version that got scrapped, always get shit for, well, your movie was terrible, it got scrapped. But everyone who worked on the animation side said they had gone above and beyond. They had not stuck to the brief of just use the old assets. They had improved the textures. They'd done so much work on shadows, lighting, textures. The movie was going to look better than the first one, which was not the plan, right? So to give credit where credit's due to the 90-odd team that made the first version of this movie that got scrapped, their work, to some degree, ended up in the second version of the movie, because some of those assets, many of those assets, were still usable. But obviously, the specifics of any sequence, the dialogue, the characters, the character arcs, the jokes, gone. New script. They had a more overt villain in Stinky Pete, because obviously in the original one they weren't really villainous, they were just a bit snobby. They added Wheezy, they expanded the visit to Al's Toy Barn, they added the opening video game sequence, they added the whole airplane section, which is the entire final act of the movie. All of that was added and reworked to give the movie more heart and more humour. So now we reach 1999. Because when they came back to work in the new year, they had a new story broken, but they had 9 months to produce this version of the film before it had to be handed to Disney for distribution. Because even if the movie was 11 months away, you can't just finish it the day before. It's got to be put on reels, it has to be trailered, it has to be rated by the ratings board. You can't just hand your work in the day before. So they had 9 of the 11 months left to actually finish the movie. So Lasseter brought in Leo.
Mad.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? I mean, have you ever heard a story like this for any film?
No, it's nuts.
It's so nuts. So Lasseter went into full-on like emergency mode. He brought in a bunch of people who'd been working on Bug's Life. He brought Lee Unkrich in to co-direct and share the load with him. They also kept Ash Brannon, the original director, on board, and they divided the work up as roughly as they could. Ash Brannon was kind of focused on directing and animation, like directing the story and the animation. Lasseter was sort of in charge of overall art, modeling, and lighting, and Unkrich was sort of overseeing editorial and layouts. But of course, there was a huge amount of overlap because the three were working very closely together and meeting almost every day, so they were all inputting into each other's sides of stuff. But with such a tight schedule, editors of the film would be working 38 to 48 hour shifts. Staff were working 100+ hour weeks for 9 months straight. The editorial department manager, Lindsay Collins, has since said that at times editors would just burst into tears out of nowhere from exhaustion. The intensity of the work leading up to the film's release was so much so that many of the animators suffered carpal tunnel syndrome and other repetitive strain injuries. Pixar executive Ed Catmull would later disclose that a full third of staff, 1/3, and keep in mind, this was probably at this point at least 300 people. At least. That's how many had worked on Bug's Life, and they needed to turn this over quicker. They all ended up with RSIs of some form. So a third of that amount. Now, Pixar have claimed that they did not encourage the long hours and actually set limits on hours employees could work by setting up a system where overtime had to be approved. They have claimed that employees regularly worked beyond what had been agreed without consulting them and were therefore doing it on their own, implying they were doing it on their own backs. But I think we have to acknowledge the
but there's
pressure.
an element of, I'm sorry, you're the ones that have emphasised how, do you know what I mean? Oh, they did it off their own back. Probably follows big speeches about how the movie needs to get done and they need to do all they can. And I'm sorry, you've set the culture for that.
Preach, absolutely, Chris. 100% agree. It's pretty disgusting. And the last story I'll tell relating to that here is the saddest, and it luckily didn't have too sad an ending, but it could have been a real tragedy. There was one instance where an animator had forgotten to drop his child off at daycare one morning, and in a mental haze, left the baby in the back seat of his car in the parking lot, and just went to work. Now, luckily, the baby was spotted. No one knew who the car belonged to, but it was spotted by someone else. Authorities were called, and I think firefighters broke into the car and rescued the baby before he even remembered it had happened. David Price wrote in his 2008 book, The Pixar Touch, although quick actions by rescue workers headed off the worst, the incident became a horrible indicator that some on the crew were working too hard. Yeah! Yeah! I would say so. I would say so.
That's really underselling that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
A baby got left in the car. People are working too hard. What?
Now, after all of that turmoil, Chris, the film was released on November 24th, 1999. They made it, they got it out, and it's a fucking miracle that it's a masterpiece. The fact this film is even watchable is, to be honest with you, a miracle, considering those constraints. And while I do admire Pixar's determination to quality, their determination to ensure quality across the product, it wasn't worth it. Put the bad version of the movie out. Don't do this to your staff. This is disgusting. This kind of crunch exists today and happened sadly recently on the Spider-Verse movie. Not acceptable. This shouldn't be happening. Shouldn't have been happening then. Shouldn't be happening now. So, I would like to praise them for making it happen and putting out a great movie. But I want it to be absolutely underlined with but they shouldn't have done it. They should have put a shitty movie out. If this was the alternative.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
No. So, that is the production story. There's still more just general triv, only a handful, but there's some of those. But is that not one of the most insane stories we've ever had on this podcast?
Yeah, that's mad, man. That's absolute mad. That's right up there with RoboCop.
Yeah, because I went into it knowing that at one point the movie had been deleted and it got saved because a lady had taken the movie home because of a baby, and I knew that there was a big shift when the movie went from straight to DVD to but I had no idea it was that. I will say as well, the blooper reel that's at the end of the credits was not part of the movie's November 24th release. That wasn't finished in time and didn't get added until screenings that began from the 25th of December that year. So after Christmas that year, that was part of the credits, but it wasn't part of the credits until before that. I guess they just issued a new version of the film with that included, which is, that's a costly endeavour to add that. I'm surprised they didn't just save that for DVD, but yeah. Do we talk about the blooper reel thing while we're here? I assume you saw the version without the really offensive one.
Yeah, I think so. I watched it on Disney Plus.
Yeah, okay. So you saw the version without it. So I couldn't watch it on Disney Plus because of an internet issue and had to watch an older copy. And there is a scene that has now been removed. So for those who don't remember, they have a fake blooper reel at the end where the characters are playing pranks on each other or forgetting their lines. It's very funny and delightful. I'm sad they don't do that anymore because I think that's it's funny it's especially funny when you know that obviously it's all fake because there's no bloopers in an animated movie like that. Do you know what I mean? So that's fun and I like that. But there's one that it was cut following controversy and understandably so. Have I got the text about it to read from, or not? No, I must have cut it at some point. Okay, so there's one where they cut to the prospector, but his box doesn't turn around. And they're like, oh, why didn't his box turn? So they turn his box around, and he's talking to two Barbies. And he's like, well, I'm very friendly with the producers. And, if you girls play your cards right, I could get you into Toy Story 3.
I remember that. I do remember that from, watching that when younger.
Yeah. And it's gross and horrible. And I think in a world where John Lasseter has been Me Too'd to some degree, and I don't know a lot about John Lasseter's Me Too'ing, so I'm gonna plead the fifth on that one. I've not looked into it. But with any amount of Me Too'ing happening to the guy that directed the movie, that scene plays deeply poorly without that context, but extra so with that context. It was gross, and I'm not surprised Disney removed it.
Yeah, I think it was the right decision to remove it for sure.
Did you that wasn't in the version, but you had the rest of them, I assume.
I'll be honest with you. I didn't not right away, and I switched off. Going, I swear there's meant to be bloopers, but it was very late at that point, so I can't tell you. I need to check.
So is it possible they're just gone altogether from the Disney Plus version?
They might. Let me try and check. I'll have to log on to Disney Plus on here.
Well,
let me try.
I'll read some. I'll read some trivia while you look, because we've got a few other quick bits. So for the scene where Woody looks up the merchandise, looks through the merchandise for Woody's Roundup. If you think that sounds very naturalistic, it's because they just showed Tom Hanks what the toys were going to be. And he was like, oh, look, I'm on a yo-yo. And it was all his actual responses. They recorded those and put them in the movie. So...
Oh, that's cool.
Lovely. Delightful. All of his dialogue from that is improvised. I should say as well, now we know the full story. You now know why Joan Cusack only had 9 months working on this movie. It's crazy that they came up with that character and added that character so late in the game. Anyway, when Woody first sees this one fucked my head a little bit, if I'm being honest with you, Chris. When Woody first sees the Finest Hour tape, it stops with a cliffhanger, and Stinky Pete's like, Woody's Roundup was cancelled before airing the conclusion. Later on in the movie, Woody's trying to show Buzz the thing, and he presses play, right? If you listen to what's happening in the background, it's the conclusion to that story, and Stinky Pete just lied. It wasn't cancelled. That cliffhanger got a conclusion. You can hear it. Woody makes it across the gorge and saves the others, and he's faintly heard asking if everyone was okay, and Jesse is heard exclaiming in relief, Sheriff Woody, I knew you'd make it. And then when Woody goes back in to watch it, and Woody's on the TV... interacting by your things with Andy's dad, that's the end of that next episode when he's singing You Got a Friend in Me. In other words, they basically hint heavily that Stinky Pete's a big old liar then. That's crazy. What a great detail. I loved finding that out. I'd never noticed that.
So why do you think he lied about that then?
Because it sells his fake story better, right? His whole "woe is me, I'm a sad cowboy, we've all been forgotten." Not just me and Jesse, but you too, Woody. Your show was cancelled. People weren't into you. You were replaced by spacemen. Sputnik happened. So yeah.
Yeah, I did enjoy like Tom Hanks's delivery of I've been there.
Yeah,
at that moment was really good.
It was really good. When Ham is flipping through the channels to looking for the Al's Toy Barn commercial, there's a ton of stuff that have got clips from other Pixar projects. Luxo Jr., Red's Dream, Tin Toy, Knick Knack. There's also the logo for the next computer that was developed by Pixar and Pixar's then CEO, Steve Jobs, as well as a few clips from Pixar's commercials that they'd done and their logo. So, yeah, some fun stuff in there. When Jessie first meets Woody, she exclaims, "Sweet mother of Abraham Lincoln." Tom Hanks is a direct descendant because Abraham Lincoln's mother was Nancy Hanks.
Oh.
I don't know if they did that on purpose or if it's just a funny thing that they discovered afterwards, but that's fun.
I would have thought they did it deliberately, I would imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. I think either is plausible. I wouldn't disbelieve if someone told me that was just they had her exclaim Abraham Lincoln, and then later on he was like, I'm related. Because I mean, how many people know that Tom Hanks is a direct descendant of Abraham Lincoln? Can't imagine many people know that. So I feel like it's possible they made the joke up without that, but it's also possible that they'd been told that and thought that'd be funny to sneak in. So who knows? A lot of people think the Woody's Roundup sequence was filmed with real puppets, but actually they just took the same CGI models that they used for the main movie and made the changes to adjust them to be puppets. So they gave them, the breaks in their jaws and arms and made all the changes to them physically so that they would look like the puppets. They then sort of made it black and white and used a technique called kinescope, which adds the scratches and hairs and bits of grain that make the image look really old. So that's how they did that.
All I heard there was same models.
Yeah, I knew that would be the conclusion. I like that you missed everything else that then went after that. But yeah, good selective hearing. It's interesting. Huh. Did you spot the cameo from from British television, Chris?
At some point, I remember recognising a voice, but no. Go on.
So, Nadia and I both thought there was something weird about when the person yelled, "Hold it! There's a couple more bags coming from the terminal." We thought it was a British accent for one, but we recognised it. Turns out, that is UK television personality Andy Peters.
Why?
Because apparently he was making a documentary on the making of the film to put out as a promotional piece when it released, on the news or, one of those 5-minute, 10-minute, Andy Peters went to go see them making the new Toy Story movie, that sort of thing. And he talked to John Lasseter, and Lasseter was like, "Yeah, we'll put you in the movie." He said, you can have a line. Awesome. But then it nearly didn't happen because Andy Peters didn't have a work permit to go to the US and record it. So they figured out a way for him to record the dialogue from a London studio supervised by Lasseter via satellite. So that's fun. I like Andy Peters.
That's wicked. That's great.
Delightful. The notes in the $1 bill specifically in the world of Toy Story has Steve Jobs on it. We see it when Al steals Woody. Sure. I'm not going to list all these because we're short for time, but I'm going to tell you guys now that this movie has 1,000 references to Bug's Life. Just hundreds of them. There's images on Andy's wall. Al's office has abstracted versions of shots from Bug's Life. When Buzz cuts through the weeds, Heimlich can be very briefly seen on the leaf. There's just 1,001 Bug's Life references in this movie. There's a list out there if you want to see them. It's very interesting. This is fun. This is the last of the main one, and then we just quickly got Cars Exist, and we're out of here. And sorry if we sound like we're rushing. It's just there is a lot to cover with this one, and we are on a timer today. Of all the movies to be on a timer for this one, when I saw the trivia, I was like, "Oh no!" I knew we were in trouble. So there was a bit of controversy surrounding the film's release on the Ultimate Toy Box DVD set. Basically, on the copies shipped through to Costco at the time of the release, the disc of this film had a manufacturing error where at one point in the movie it unexpectedly changes to a scene from Touchstone Pictures' R-rated film High Fidelity, which has the word fuck said multiple times. This obviously caused a number of complaints from parents and people who bought the set, because both versions of the complaint, the I bought this set and the movie isn't fully on it because there's a random chunk of High Fidelity in my Toy Story DVD, but also the parents that were complaining because obviously their kid had been exposed to a bunch of swearing due to a glitch. Costco obviously recalled the copies, replaced it with a fixed version. According to Technicolor, who are the company that manufactured the set, they believe the glitch, the content error, as they described it, was on less than 1% of the discs shipped. Obviously, there's no way to verify that, but it's quite funny. I enjoy that fact.
But also, have they explained how it happened?
Yeah, I mean, no, they don't really explain how, but I've got to assume that when you're compiling DVDs, because they're in chapters, it's like multiple files, right? And I've got to assume if you get the chapter of another DVD you're producing mixed up, like if a chapter 11 of High Fidelity gets mixed up with chapter 11 of Toy Story when you're compiling the files, is my assumption, but I don't know. It is weird, and I've never heard of it happening before. So, I mean, you get mismanufactured DVDs where the content on the disc isn't the content on the box. That's happened. I've heard of recalls related to that, but never a portion of a movie spliced into another. But my only thought is that it's the chaptering system. So. Yeah.
Fair enough.
So this movie was, as I mentioned earlier, made for $90 million in the end, but that does include the 9-month crunch chunk, which probably cost a fair bit to put that many staff on it and turn it around that quickly. Do you want to have a guess how much money it made in the box office, Chris? Worldwide?
240 million.
It made $497 million at the worldwide box office, meaning it made 5.5...
Worth doing, then.
Yeah, it made 5.5 times its budget.
Even with all of that grief and stuff, that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it won't heal carpal tunnel syndrome or the emotional damage. But
like you say, it's not. It's like you said earlier. It's not. None of it's worth all of that.
No, put the shitty version out. Anyway, it's time for everyone's favourite segment, Chris. Cars Exist.
No.
Just got two little ones this week. They're fun. It's an interesting one. So apparently there was a Ford vehicle that was never put into production. It was just a concept. It was called the Ford Mystery, and apparently for some reason, Pixar based Al's car both internally and externally on this never-produced Ford car. I have no idea why. I don't know if they licensed it. I don't know if it was just easier because they were working from an existing design. But that's what they did. I shrug. Very strange, but fine. Based on a car that doesn't actually exist, but one that was designed by Ford. So... the other little bit of Cars Exist trivia is the car Buzz and Ham drive to find Woody is a gyoza, which is a pun on Toyota, and obviously gyoza is a type of Asian dumpling. So there you go.
Well, there you go.
We did it.
I have checked, just so you know.
Oh yeah, did you have the end of it?
Yeah, so one, there is no beat. I think I was just watching this film at 2:30, knowing I needed to get up at 6, and just went, man, I'll watch the bloopers tomorrow. So there's no beat. The bloopers come right away. And the Barbie one's been cut. There is no Proctor. There is no Stinky Pete and Barbie.
Which is not surprising, because the trivia I read relating to that, let me see if I can quickly find it, said it was removed during a DVD one a few years later. Let's see. I'll see if I can quickly find that, because it won't be... Yeah, so in the closing outtakes portion of the credits, Stinky Pete, voiced by Kelsey Grammer, dismisses two Barbie dolls with the phrase, "Off you go," then the catchphrase of another famous Kelsey Grammer character. Where's the thing about it being removed? the scene of Stinky Pete being flirtatious with the two Barbies, I'm sure I could get your part with Toy Story 3, is a reference to Hollywood's long history of casting couch practices, but the scene was cut after the emergence of the Me Too movement. Yeah, not something to make light of in a children's film.
No, I don't think so.
No. So that's everything. We did it. It's a great film. Look,
We did it.
It won't shock anyone to hear that Toy Story 2 is amazing. It's one of the weaker of those four, but that is not saying much, right? I want to make it very clear.
No.
That it is the fact that the movie is functional at all, knowing its production history, is a miracle in of itself. But I will say, just as a film, if we're taking that context away from it, brilliant sequel, genuinely brilliant sequel. I was
absolutely.
I was thrilled with it then, and I'm thrilled with it now. It's a great movie.
Yeah, for sure. My headphones are beeping. It's not a battery thing. I know what it is, but if anyone can hear a beep, I apologise, because I don't know if it's loud, if it's beeping externally or just in my ears. So if you can hear that, apologies.
Yeah, I'm sure it's fine. So the question, though, Chris, we've got to ask through the beeping. What's next? It's your choice, mate.
Well,
so we're in sequel territory now.
Yeah. We're gonna do an interesting one, Dan.
I think that
beeping
is external because I just heard it. It's fine, just so you know, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh, apologies if that's happening. I can reset my headphones.
It is up to you. Do you have the time?
Yeah, let me just reset my headphones quickly. One sec.
Right.
Am I back for you, Dan?
Yes, you're back. So for listeners,
Yeah. Okay, cool.
if there was probably a cut there. Sorry, I'm going to go back to that. Hello. You might have noticed a quick cut there. Chris had beeping, which you will have heard. We cut to solve that problem. And now I'm asking the question, Chris. Where next? We're in sequel season. You have to choose a sequel. And you've got 4 choices to make between now and the trilogy we're doing this year, which I think we've sort of already revealed, but we'll leave a little bit of suspense for anyone who's not been paying attention to like social media or the Discord. Where are you thinking?
I think some would argue I'm going to waste a choice, but here we go.
Oh dear. I think I know what this might mean. I think I know what this might mean. Go on.
No, I don't think it means what you think it means. Do you think it means Jingle All the Way too?
I do worry that is what you're about to select. Yes.
No. I'm picking a movie. I'm not sure if you've seen this movie.
Okay.
I'm picking a really interesting movie because, or at least I think this could be. It's an intriguing. Whether we can stretch it out for an hour and 45 to 2 hours, I don't know. But the reason I'm picking this movie is because it got hugely it got terrible reviews when it came out. But when I watched it, I went, it's not amazing. But I do think there's some amusing moments, and I do think it is actually a true sequel to the original film.
I think I know what this might be.
Reviewed the... Yeah, I think you will know what this means, because when we reviewed the original film, our conclusion, if memory served, was this isn't as good as people remember it being. So, will the sequel be better than people think? Will it be a true sequel to the original movie? Will it be comparable with the original movie? Because we don't think that it was particularly amazing. And if there hadn't been such a big gap, would it have been better reviewed? Because actually, it is exactly that. It is a true sequel to the movie. Or will it not be as good? Will it just be actually pretty terrible and all the reviews were right? So we are stepping into Dumb and Dumber 2.
Yes, and not the movie in the middle of that franchise, the Dumb and Dumber When Harry Met Lloyd. You're skipping that one.
Yeah, not Dumb and Dumber When Harry Met Lloyd, because that's a prequel and this is a direct sequel. As in, I think we can justify skipping that because, this is a sequel, that was a prequel, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, have you seen it?
I haven't. I don't think I did in the end, I remember being intrigued by it. I remember watching the first trailer or second trailer and being like, it looks all right. But I hadn't rewatched the first one at that point, and I sort of made a point I was going to rewatch the first one, and then I don't think I ever got around to it, rewatching the first or then watching the second. And then when we rewatched the first, any enthusiasm I had for the franchise was just died on its arse, because we didn't particularly enjoy revisiting the first one. Wow.
No, and I might revisit the first one again just to kind of have that framing of, is it actually a fair sequel to that first film? If I get a chance, I don't know for sure. Depends when we record. But yeah, I'm slightly tempted to do that. I'm not expecting you to do that, because I think then you'll just go into the sequel not happy. But I remember there in particular, my memory is there was at least one gag that I thought was legitimately very funny. So I'm intrigued to see what
I remember there being one
like.
gag in the trailer I thought was funny. So
yeah. So yeah, we shall see. Does it deserve its criticism? Let's find out when we look at Dumb and Dumber 2.
Dumb and Dumber 2. So there you go. So come back in a week's time to hear that, unless you, of course, you're on our Patreon, patreon.com/nothingbutstatic, where you can hear that episode right now, because episodes of Rewind Reviews go up 1 week early over on Patreon, and you don't have to subscribe to a particularly high tier, as little as $1 a month. There are higher tiers if you'd like to support us with more, but you don't have to do that. If you don't have to do anything, you can just wait a week. That's also fine. If you want to support us, though, there's a few different ways you can do it. You can tell a friend, you can just keep listening, that's also good. But if you want to do something a bit more practical, a bit more hands-on, of course, you can go over to any of the platforms that we're on and interact with the podcast, whether it's liking it, reviewing it, stars, hearts, comments, all that stuff. Tells the algorithm you enjoyed it and we're engaging with it, and then makes it more likely to share it with others. And of course, if you've got any feedback from this episode, for example, what the fuck happened on Toy Story 2's production, that was insane, feel free to pass that along. You can get us in a couple of different ways. Mail at nothingbutstatic.co.uk will find us. We're on the Discord. We have a Discord, but you can only get access to that through the Patreon, but that's one way to get to us. The other way, of course, is to find the YouTube post of this podcast and put it in the comment section there, which has a double whammy effect of both giving us your thoughts, but also engaging with our stuff. So that's a win. So, those are all the ways in which you can support us. We're happy for you guys just to keep listening, though. Honestly, like, anyone who's doing that, you're already a hero. So anything beyond that is even more so. Really excited to be back for Rewind Reviews. Very curious about Dumb and Dumber 2. What an interesting choice Chris has made. but I do genuinely think like
it's
something...
purely it's a choice for the discussion. And like I say, that discussion might not need to be very long, but I looked at the list and I was like, let's take a critical analysis of Dumb and Dumber 2 and see what we find.
Yeah, and hopefully it won't be 2 hours and 8 minutes like this one's been. But hey, I put that down to the production history. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, I hope you guys are excited for us to be back. We are, and I will tell you now that there is a bonus episode of this podcast coming at the end of the year, because at the end of this season, we're doing a trilogy. We might have already announced. I can't remember what we have and haven't said now. But we then have an extra bonus, sort of part 2 to the 100th episode. That is, I'm really excited about doing. I can't wait.
That was so weird because you almost said the same sentence like minutes apart. Where you went, we're doing a trilogy. I'm not sure if earlier on you were like, we're doing a trilogy. I'm not sure if we've announced. We've sort of hinted at it, but in case you don't follow the Discord and stuff, we'll keep that a surprise. And then like 2 minutes later, you're like, not sure if we've announced that.
Yeah, well, I'll be honest with you, Chris. It's one of those things where when I'm doing the outro, sometimes like there's an element of like, have I said that? It wouldn't surprise me if you went back through our history where there'd been days when I've told people to go to patreon.com/nothingbutstatic and then 5 minutes later said the same thing again, not realising I'd already done it.
Oh, yeah.
That's definitely happened.
For sure.
Almost certainly. But yeah, I'm still very excited about it. I hope you all are too, and we'll see you in a week's time for the other one. So Chris ends this podcast, so I'm going to hand it over to him.
Oh, yeah. I'm Chris Billingham.
I'm Dan Doolan.
And this review has been rewound.